The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge when Harold Whitman received the letter that would change everything. The banker's hands trembled as he read the crude scrawl. Your money or your life. The Dalton gang knows where you sleep. 3 days. Outside his office window, the town bustled with its usual rhythm. Merchants hawking their wares, children chasing chickens through the mud, and the distant sound of hammers ringing from the blacksmith's forge. But Harold saw none of it. His mind was consumed by the very real threat that had been stalking him for weeks, growing closer with each passing day. Harold Whitman was not a brave man, and he knew it with painful clarity. At 52, his soft hands had never held anything more dangerous than a fountain pen, and his greatest physical exertion came from climbing the stairs to his second-floor office each morning. The Copper Ridge First National Bank had made him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, but wealth meant nothing if he wasn't alive to enjoy it. The Dalton gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, robbing banks, stagecoaches, and anyone foolish enough to travel alone with valuables. Their reputation for violence preceded them like a dark storm cloud, and now they had set their sights directly on him. I need protection, Harold muttered to himself, pacing frantically behind his mahogany desk. The floorboards creaked under his nervous steps as he wore a path in the expensive carpet his wife had ordered from back east. He had already contacted Sheriff Morrison, but the sheriff was one man with a drinking problem and arthritis in his gun hand, hardly a match for the most feared outlaws in 3 territories. The territorial marshal was 3 days' ride away, assuming he could even spare a man from his already stretched forces. Harold needed someone immediately, someone skilled, someone fearless, someone who could stand between him and the most dangerous killers in the American West. The banker's reputation for fairness and his substantial wealth had made him many friends in Copper Ridge, but it had also made him enemies. The Dalton gang's interest in him wasn't random. Harold's bank held the payroll for 3 mining operations, the Cattle Ranchers Association funds, and the territorial government's tax collections. He was quite literally the richest target for 500 miles in any direction. That afternoon, Harold posted notices throughout town with shaking hands. Bodyguard wanted. Excellent pay for experienced gunfighter. Must be available immediately. Inquire at First National Bank. He expected grizzled cowboys with weathered faces and quick draws, former cavalry soldiers with military discipline, maybe even a retired lawman or two looking for one last payday. What he didn't expect was the figure that appeared in his doorway just as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow through the bank's windows. She couldn't have been more than 19 years old, standing barely 5 feet tall in worn moccasins that had seen countless miles of hard travel. Her long black hair was intricately braided with small eagle feathers and colorful beads that caught the dying light, and her dark eyes held an intensity that made Harold's breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork and a leather vest that spoke of practical use rather than ornamentation. But what dominated the entire scene, what made Harold's jaw drop in disbelief, was the enormous shotgun slung across her back, a weapon that seemed impossibly large for her slight frame, yet she carried it as naturally as breathing. "You need bodyguard," she said, her English accented but perfectly clear, each word carefully chosen. "I am Ayana of the Lakota people. I protect you from bad men who threaten your life." Harold blinked rapidly, certain he was hallucinating from stress and fear. I'm sorry, miss, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I'm looking for a professional gunfighter, someone with real experience fighting dangerous men. You think small woman cannot fight?" Yana's eyes flashed dangerously, and Harold felt a chill run down his spine. "You think because I am native, because I am woman, I am weak. You think my people do not know war." No, that's not what I meant at all," Harold stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "It's just that the Dalton gang, they're cold-blooded killers, miss. Dangerous men who wouldn't hesitate to murder anyone who stands in their way." Yana stepped forward with fluid grace and in one impossibly smooth motion, swung the massive shotgun from her back to her hands. The weapon was indeed enormous, a custom-built double barrel that looked like it could stop a charging buffalo at 50 yards. She handled it with the practiced ease of someone born to the weapon, her small hands finding their positions without conscious thought. "This is grandmother's thunder," she said, her voice carrying a reverence that made Harold shiver. "It belonged to my grandmother and her grandmother before her. It has never failed to protect those under its care. The spirits of my ancestors guide its aim, and their wisdom flows through my hands." Harold stared at the weapon, then at the young woman holding it with such confidence. There was something in her eyes, a certainty, a depth of experience that spoke of battles fought and won, of life-and-death situations survived through skill and determination. Despite every logical thought screaming in his head, despite his reservations about hiring someone so young and seemingly fragile, Harold found himself believing that this slip of a girl might actually be capable of protecting him from the most feared gang in the territory. What are your terms?" he asked hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. $50, food and place to sleep until danger passes," Iana replied without hesitation, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "And you show respect for my people and my ways. No questions about how I do things." It was far less than Harold had expected to pay. He'd been prepared to offer 3 times that amount to the right gunfighter. Something in her manner, in the way she held herself with quiet dignity and unshakable confidence, convinced him that she was deadly serious about her offer. Against his better judgment, against every conventional thought in his businessman's mind, Harold found himself nodding slowly. "Very well, Miss Iana, you're hired, but I have to ask, how do I know you can actually protect me? Have you ever faced men like the Daltons before?" Iana's expression grew distant, and for a moment Harold glimpsed something dark and painful in her eyes. "3 winters ago, white men came to my village. They killed my father, my brother, many others. They thought native people were easy targets, that we would not fight back." Her grip tightened on grandmother's thunder. "They were wrong. I was the only one left standing when the sun set that day." The banker felt a chill run through him at the quiet intensity in her voice. This was no boastful gunslinger spinning tall tales. This was someone who had faced real violence and emerged victorious. I'm sorry for your loss. The dead are with the spirits now," Iana said simply. "But their killers learned that day that size and strength mean nothing against skill and determination. The Dalton gang will learn the same lesson." That night, Ayana made her camp in the bank itself, spreading her bedroll near the front door where she could watch both entrances. Harold offered her a room at the hotel, but she declined, explaining that she needed to understand the space she would be defending. She moved through the building like a ghost, testing sight lines, identifying cover positions, and memorizing every detail that might matter in a fight. "Tell me about these Dalton men," she said as Harold prepared to leave for his home. "How many? What weapons? How do they fight?" Harold pulled out a folder thick with wanted posters and newspaper clippings. "There are 5 of them, led by Jake Dalton. He's the most dangerous, fast with a gun and completely ruthless. His brother Tom is almost as good and just as mean. Then there's Miguel Santos, a Mexican gunfighter they picked up in Texas. He's supposed to be lightning fast. The other 2 are muscle, Big Jim Crawford and a man they call Scarface Pete." Yana studied each poster carefully, memorizing faces and details. "They always attack together. Usually. They hit the bank in Tombstone with all 5 men, same with the stagecoach robberies. They overwhelm their targets with superior numbers and firepower." "Good," Yana said, surprising Harold. "When men fight as pack, they think like pack. Predictable. They will expect fear, expect running. They will not expect grandmother's thunder." The next morning brought news that chilled Harold's blood. A rider arrived with word that the Dalton gang had been spotted just 20 miles outside of town, moving in Copper Ridge's direction. They would likely arrive by evening, and everyone knew they weren't coming for a social visit. Word spread quickly through the town, and by noon Copper Ridge had become a ghost town. Shops closed, families barricaded themselves in their homes, and even the saloon, which never closed, shuttered its doors. The only people left on the street were Sheriff Morrison, who was too drunk to understand the danger, and Ayanna, who stood calmly in front of the bank like a sentinel. Harold watched from his office window as the young woman prepared for battle. She had positioned herself where she could see the entire main street, with the bank's solid brick walls at her back. Grandmother's thunder rested easily in her hands, and she had arranged additional ammunition within easy reach. There was something almost ritualistic about her preparations. She spoke quietly in her native language, touching the feathers in her hair and the beads on her dress as if drawing strength from them. "Are you sure about this?" Harold called down to her. "We could still leave town, wait for the marshal. Running solves nothing," Yana replied without taking her eyes off the street. "They will follow. Better to face them here, where I choose the ground." As the afternoon wore on, Harold found himself studying his unlikely protector with growing amazement. She never seemed nervous or afraid, never fidgeted or showed any sign of doubt. She simply waited with the patience of a hunter, completely focused on the task ahead. Occasionally, she would adjust her position slightly or check her weapon, but mostly she stood as still as a statue, watching the empty street with unwavering attention. The sun was beginning to set when the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the town. 5 riders appeared at the far end of Main Street, moving at a leisurely pace that spoke of absolute confidence. Even from a distance, Harold could see they were heavily armed and dangerous-looking men, who had clearly never met a challenge they couldn't overcome through violence and intimidation. Jake Dalton rode in the center, a tall man with cold eyes and a reputation for cruelty that extended far beyond simple robbery. His brother Tom flanked him on the right, while Miguel Santos rode to the left, his hand already resting on his gun. Big Jim Crawford and Scarface Pete brought up the rear, their rifles prominently displayed across their saddles. They stopped about 50 yards from the bank, clearly expecting to find the building undefended and ready for plunder. Instead, they found a small Native American woman standing calmly in their path, holding a shotgun that seemed too large for her to handle. Jake Dalton laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the empty buildings. "Well, well, looks like the banker hired himself some protection. Little girl, you better run along home before you get hurt." Yana said nothing. She simply stood her ground, grandmother's thunder held ready but not yet raised to firing position. Her silence seemed to unnerve the outlaws more than any threat could have. "I'm talking to you, squaw," Jake snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. "You deaf as well as stupid." "I hear you," Yana said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I hear men who think they are wolves but are only dogs, dogs who bark loud because they are afraid." The insult hit home, and Harold could see the rage building in Jake Dalton's face. This was exactly what he had feared. His protector was going to provoke them into a fight she couldn't possibly win. Tom Dalton spat into the dust and urged his horse forward a few steps. "Jake, let's just kill her and get this over with. We didn't ride all this way to listen to some Indian girl run her mouth." But Jake held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Ayanna. There was something about her stillness, her complete lack of fear, that was beginning to disturb him. In his years of robbery and murder, he had seen every type of person: brave men who fought to the end, cowards who begged for mercy, and everything in between. But he had never encountered someone who faced 5 armed killers with such calm certainty. "You know who we are, girl?" Jake asked, his voice taking on a more dangerous edge. "We're the Dalton gang. We've killed more men than you've got years on this earth. We've robbed banks from here to California, and ain't nobody ever stopped us. Not the law, not the army, not nobody." "I know who you are," Yana replied, her voice steady as stone. "You are men who take what others have built, who kill what others have loved. You are empty men who fill themselves with other people's fear." Miguel Santos laughed nervously and adjusted his grip on his reins. "She's loco, Jake. Completely loco. Let's just ride her down and be done with it. But something in Ayanna's manner was affecting all of them now. Big Jim Crawford shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, and even Scarface Pete seemed less confident than usual. There was an aura about the young woman that spoke of power, not the crude power of guns and violence that the outlaws understood, but something deeper and more primal. "Last chance, little girl," Jake said, drawing his Colt 45 with practiced speed. "Step aside, or we'll step over your body." Yana's response was to raise grandmother's thunder to her shoulder in one fluid motion. The massive shotgun seemed to dwarf her small frame, but she handled it with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a master craftsman. "You want banker's money? You go through me first." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. 5 experienced killers on horseback, armed with rifles and pistols, facing one young woman with a shotgun. By every logical measure, the outcome should have been predetermined. But logic had no place in what was about to unfold. Jake Dalton made the first move, spurring his horse forward while raising his gun. It was a mistake that would cost him dearly. The moment his horse began to move, Ayanna squeezed the trigger of grandmother's thunder. The sound was unlike anything Harold had ever heard, not just the boom of a shotgun, but something deeper and more resonant, as if the very air itself was being torn apart. The muzzle flash lit up the entire street like lightning, and the recoil that should have knocked Ayanna backward seemed to flow through her like water, absorbed and redirected by some invisible force. Jake Dalton's horse reared and screamed as the massive load of buckshot caught both rider and mount. Jake was thrown backward out of his saddle, his gun flying from his hand as he hit the ground hard and didn't get up. His horse, wounded but not killed, bolted down the street in panic. The other 4 outlaws sat frozen for a crucial second, stunned by the devastating effectiveness of the shot and the impossible speed with which Ayanna had fired. In that second of hesitation, she broke open grandmother's thunder, ejected the spent shells, and reloaded with movements so fast they seemed supernatural. "Jesus Christ!" Tom Dalton shouted, finally spurring his own horse into action. Kill her now." But the outlaws' advantage of numbers was already beginning to work against them. In their panic to attack, they got in each other's way. Miguel Santos tried to wheel his horse to the left just as Big Jim Crawford spurred forward, and their mounts collided in a tangle of legs and cursing riders. Yana used their confusion to devastating effect. She fired grandmother's thunder's second barrel at Tom Dalton, who was charging straight at her with his rifle raised. The shot caught him center mass and lifted him clean out of his saddle, sending him crashing into the hitching post in front of the general store. By now, the remaining 3 outlaws had managed to sort themselves out, but their confidence was completely shattered. They had expected to face a terrified banker and maybe a drunk sheriff. Instead, they found themselves in a real fight against someone who seemed to possess almost supernatural skill. Scarface Pete, perhaps the least intelligent of the group, decided to charge straight at Ayanna while she was reloading. It was exactly the wrong move. As he bore down on her, Ayanna calmly finished loading grandmother's thunder, raised it to her shoulder, and fired both barrels simultaneously. The double blast was even more devastating than her previous shots. Scarface Pete simply disappeared in a cloud of smoke and thunder, his horse continuing its charge for several steps before realizing its rider was no longer aboard. Miguel Santos and Big Jim Crawford, the only survivors, had finally realized they were not facing an ordinary opponent. Both men were experienced fighters who had survived countless gunfights, and their instincts were screaming at them to retreat. But their pride and their reputation wouldn't let them run from a single woman, no matter how deadly she proved to be. "Spread out," Miguel shouted to Big Jim. "She can't get both of us if we come from different directions." It was sound tactical thinking, but they had underestimated both Ayanna's speed and her understanding of combat. As the 2 men separated to attack from different angles, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone watching. Instead of trying to defend her position, Ayana charged. She ran straight at Miguel Santos, grandmother's thunder held at the ready. The Mexican gunfighter, caught completely off guard by this unexpected tactic, tried to bring his rifle to bear, but Ayana was moving too fast and too unpredictably. She fired one barrel while running, the shot taking Miguel's horse in the chest and sending both rider and mount tumbling to the ground. Big Jim Crawford, seeing his last partner fall, finally broke. His nerve, which had carried him through dozens of robberies and murders, simply snapped. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the edge of town, abandoning any thought of completing their mission. But Ayana wasn't finished. She turned and fired grandmother's thunder's remaining barrel at the fleeing outlaw. The range was extreme for a shotgun, but the massive weapon's power carried the shot far enough to catch Big Jim in the back, knocking him from his saddle just as he reached the town limits. In less than 5 minutes, the most feared gang in 3 territories had been completely destroyed by a 19-year-old Native American woman with a shotgun that seemed to possess a will of its own. Harold Whitman emerged from his bank in a daze, unable to fully comprehend what he had just witnessed. The street was littered with bodies and wounded horses, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Yana stood in the middle of it all, calmly reloading grandmother's thunder, as if she had just finished target practice, rather than the most one-sided gunfight in the history of the American West. Is it over? Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yana nodded, sliding fresh shells into her weapon. It is finished. The Dalton gang will trouble no one else. As the smoke cleared and the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in, Harold found himself staring at a scene that would be talked about for generations. The most feared outlaws in the territory lay scattered across Main Street like broken dolls. Their reign of terror ended by a young woman who barely came up to their shoulders. But even as relief flooded through him, Harold began to understand that this victory would bring its own complications. Within an hour, people began emerging from their hiding places. Sheriff Morrison, sobered by the sound of gunfire, stumbled out of his office and stood slack-jawed at the carnage. Townspeople crept from their homes and businesses, whispering among themselves as they surveyed the aftermath. Some looked at Ayana with gratitude, others with fear, and a few with something approaching awe. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," Sheriff Morrison muttered, kneeling beside Jake Dalton's body. "I've never seen anything like this. 5 men, all dead or dying, and not a scratch on her." But Harold noticed something that the others missed. Miguel Santos was still breathing, though barely. The Mexican gunfighter had been thrown clear when his horse fell, and while he was badly injured, he was very much alive. Yana noticed too, and she walked over to where he lay groaning in the dust. "You live," she observed, standing over him with grandmother's thunder held casually but ready. "Your friends are with the spirits, but you still breathe. Why should I let you keep breathing?" Miguel looked up at her through pain-clouded eyes, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Because you're not like us," he gasped. "You're not a killer for the sake of killing." "I kill to protect," Yana replied. "But you kill for money, for pleasure. You are like a rabid wolf that must be put down." "Wait," Harold interjected, surprising himself with his own boldness. "Don't kill him. He's beaten, finished. Let the law deal with him." Yana's dark eyes studied Harold for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. "You show mercy to one who would have shown you none. This is why you are worth protecting." She stepped back from Miguel but kept her weapon trained on him. "You will live, but you will never ride with outlaws again. If I hear of you hurting innocent people, I will find you, and next time there will be no mercy." Miguel nodded weakly, understanding that he had just been given a gift he didn't deserve. Sheriff Morrison, finally remembering his duties, moved to arrest the wounded outlaw, though it was clear Miguel wouldn't be going anywhere for quite some time. As the immediate crisis passed, Harold began to realize that word of this gunfight would spread far beyond Copper Ridge. The Dalton gang had been notorious throughout the West, and their destruction at the hands of a single Native American woman would become the stuff of legend. But legends, Harold knew, had a way of attracting attention, not all of it welcome. "Miss Ayanna," he said quietly, drawing her aside as the townspeople continued to gawk at the scene. "What you did today, it's going to make you famous. People will come looking for you, some to thank you, others to test themselves against you. Are you prepared for that?" Gianna considered his words carefully. "Fame is like fire," she said finally. "It can warm you or burn you depending on how you handle it. I did not fight for fame. I fought because it was right. But what will you do now? The danger to me is over, but there will be other dangers, other people who need protection." For the first time since Harold had met her, Iana smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed her entire face. "My grandmother used to say that grandmother's thunder chooses its own path. Perhaps it has chosen to protect those who cannot protect themselves." That evening, as the bodies were removed and the street cleaned, Harold sat in his office with Iana, settling her payment. But as he counted out the $50 they had agreed upon, he found himself reluctant to see her go. "I know this wasn't part of our arrangement," he said hesitantly, "but I'd like to offer you more. What you did today, it was worth far more than $50. Gianna shook her head. "A deal is a deal. I take what we agreed, nothing more." "Then let me ask you something else. Would you consider staying in Copper Ridge, not as my bodyguard but as our protector? This town could use someone like you." The offer clearly surprised her. "You would trust me, a native woman in a white man's town?" "After what I saw today, I'd trust you with my life," Harold replied without hesitation. "And I think most folks in this town would feel the same way." Gianna was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently stroking the stock of grandmother's thunder. "I will think about it," she said finally. "But first I must return to my people. They need to know what happened here, and I need to seek the wisdom of the elders." "Of course, but the offer stands whenever you're ready." As Ayanna prepared to leave, Harold couldn't help but ask one more question. "That shotgun of yours, grandmother's thunder, is it really? I mean, did it actually belong to your grandmother?" Gianna's eyes grew distant, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of generations. "My grandmother was a warrior woman, one of the last to fight the white soldiers in the old way. When she was dying, she called me to her side and placed this weapon in my hands. She told me that it carried the spirits of all the women in our family who had fought to protect their people." She paused, her hand resting on the massive weapon. "I thought she was speaking in metaphors, the way old people do. But today when I fought those men, I felt them with me. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, all of them. Their strength flowed through me, their wisdom guided my aim." Harold felt a chill run down his spine. "You really believe that?" "I know it," Gianna said simply. "Grandmother's thunder is more than just a weapon. It is a legacy, a responsibility, and a sacred trust. Today it chose to protect you and this town. Tomorrow it may choose something else." As she walked toward the door, Harold called after her. "Will I see you again?" Gianna paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the setting sun. "If the spirits will it, and if grandmother's thunder calls me back, then yes, you will see me again." And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering darkness like a ghost. Harold stood at his window, watching until he could no longer see her figure on the horizon, wondering if he had just witnessed the beginning of a legend. 3 months later, Harold Whitman received a letter that made him smile for the first time since the gunfight. It was written in careful English on paper that smelled faintly of sage and wood smoke. "Mr. Whitman, I have spoken with the elders of my people, and they have given me their blessing. Grandmother's thunder has shown me visions of other towns, other people who need protection from those who would do them harm. I am returning to Copper Ridge, not just to accept your offer, but to make it my base as I travel the territory helping those who cannot help themselves. The spirits have shown me that this is my path." Harold immediately began preparations for her return. He arranged for a small house on the edge of town to be made available to her, and he spoke with the town council about officially appointing her as Copper Ridge's protector. There was some resistance at first. The idea of a Native American woman serving in any official capacity was radical for the time, but the memory of what she had done to the Dalton gang was still fresh in everyone's mind. When Ayanna returned, she found a town transformed. Word of the gunfight had indeed spread throughout the West, and Copper Ridge had become something of a pilgrimage site for those seeking justice or protection. Some came hoping to hire her services. Others simply wanted to see the woman who had single-handedly destroyed the most feared gang in 3 territories. But Ayanna handled her newfound fame with the same calm dignity she had shown in facing the outlaws. She accepted some jobs, always choosing to help those who truly needed protection rather than those who could simply afford to pay the most. She turned down others, particularly those that would have required her to act as an enforcer for wealthy men who wanted to intimidate their business rivals. Harold watched with admiration as she established herself not just as a gunfighter, but as a force for justice in a land where justice was often in short supply. She helped a widow protect her ranch from claim jumpers, escorted a group of Chinese immigrants safely through territory controlled by hostile gangs, and even mediated disputes between native tribes and white settlers, using her unique position to bridge 2 worlds that rarely understood each other. Grandmother's thunder became as famous as its wielder. Stories spread of the massive shotgun's supernatural accuracy and devastating power. Some claimed it never missed its target. Others said it could fire farther than any normal weapon. Harold, who had witnessed its power firsthand, suspected that at least some of the stories were true. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Ayanna's new role was how she changed Copper Ridge itself. The town, which had always been just another rough frontier settlement, began to attract a different kind of person. Honest merchants, skilled craftsmen, and families looking for a safe place to build their lives all came to Copper Ridge, drawn by its reputation as a place where justice prevailed and the innocent were protected. Harold's bank prospered as never before, but more importantly, he found himself part of a community that was becoming something special. The fear that had once dominated frontier life began to fade, replaced by a sense of security that came from knowing that someone was watching over them, someone who could not be bought, intimidated, or corrupted. One evening, as Harold was closing the bank, he found Ayanna sitting on the steps, cleaning grandmother's thunder with the same careful attention she gave to everything she did. "Any regrets?" he asked, settling down beside her. Ayanna considered the question seriously, as she did all questions. "My grandmother used to say that regret is like looking backward while walking forward. It only leads to stumbling. I chose this path, and it has led to good things. The spirits are pleased. And what does the future hold? Will you stay in Copper Ridge forever?" "Nothing is forever," Ayanna replied, her eyes distant. "But for now, this is where I belong. Grandmother's thunder is content here. And so am I." As the sun set over Copper Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Harold reflected on how much his life had changed since that terrifying morning when he had received the Dalton gang's threat. He had hired a bodyguard out of fear and desperation, never imagining that he was actually inviting a legend into his life. The town was peaceful now, its streets safe for children to play and honest people to conduct their business without fear. And watching over it all was a young Native American woman with an ancient shotgun, a living reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most desperate circumstances. Harold smiled as he watched Ayanna finish her work and head toward her small house at the edge of town. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people in need of protection, new opportunities to make the frontier a little bit safer and a little bit more just. And grandmother's thunder would be ready.